Thank you. Thank you very much to Shabnam for this opportunity to speak at this marvelous and much needed citizens conclave. Now, my brief presentation will address the central question that Tanika raised in her brief introductory remarks, which is about the two conceptions of nationalism. And indeed, as it turns out, I have titled this presentation as The Two Concepts of Nationalism in India. Now, for the past few years, there have been contentious debates about Indian nationalism, which began with the arrest of Kanhaiya Kumar, the president of the Jawaharlal Nehru University Students' Union, by the Delhi police on charges of sedition in February 2016. Barely a month later, Arun Jaitley claimed that BJP has won the ideological battle on nationalism, as people who raised anti-India slogans till now have been forced to say Jai Hind, if not Bharat Mata Ki Jai. The BJP government was clearly convinced that it had been successful in imposing its vision of nationalism. Notwithstanding Jaitley's claims of the ideological triumph of BJP's nationalism, I think it is extremely important to reaffirm that there are two versions of nationalism in India as we speak. What is happening in India today is a transition from inclusive nationalism to an exclusive nationalism based on religious identity, which is being assiduously promoted by the ruling dispensation at the center and in many states. Then there is, of course, a third position, which is advocated by many on the left who believe that the era of the nation state and nationalism has ended, and the pursuit of global democratic governance should be given priority. They see nationalism as a basically negative phenomenon, possessing little or no virtue now. According to this view, the fight against Hindutva, for instance, should be carried out in the name of democracy and internationalism, and not through an alternative conception of nationalism. I don't necessarily share this view. Now, for a variety of reasons, nationalism's powerful appeal to popular loyalties has not diminished. Hence, we cannot escape political engagement at the level of the national, especially after the rise of the right in India, as indeed elsewhere, and its advocacy of populist nationalism. In India, such a possibility has been created by the sustained grassroots level work done by the RSS and its wide variety of organizations which can now intervene in almost all aspects of social and political life. Today, it is claiming the sole right to define nationalism and who we were as a people, what we are and what we should be. This reimagination, as was pointed out by both Apurvanand as well as by Dr. Sachidanandan, clearly involves rewriting history, falsifying facts, and fanning prejudice and bigotry. Make no mistake, this is a well-thought-out project, long in the making, for clearly about 100 years, to refashion the very idea of India, which is essentially liberal and pluralist. BJP's nationalism then, by its very nature, is non-secular, non-democratic, and majoritarian. It invokes a sense of otherness towards various minorities, and not only the Muslim minorities. The chief flaw in this project, and I think this is really the central point, the chief flaw in this project is the delinking of democracy and secularism, which weakens democracy and also narrows the social basis of nationalism. It commits the party, that is the BJP, to demonizing, excluding, and alienating too many members of the Indian population, and again, not only Muslims, it's very clear, it is obviously excluding Dalits as well. Historically, hatred of the ethnic or the religious other has spread fast when it is offered by demagogues as a compensation for economic failure or inadequacy. Minorities are traditionally scapegoats in dysfunctional nation states. But India was not a dysfunctional nation state. Hence, Hindu nationalists did not succeed for most of independent India's history, because most Indians, I think even to this day, notwithstanding what we have heard, I believe, uphold an everyday wisdom of coexistence. But an illusory promise of economic redemption and a fantasy of India's superpowerdom, shared by more and more people outside the middle classes, because at one time it was essentially a middle class dream. But now this aspiration to be a superpower is shared by more and more people outside the middle classes, and that has helped to promote a crude, chauvinistic nationalism. In the event, it has become somewhat better, that is BJP has been, and RSS, has been somewhat better able than ever before to sell its anti-Muslim ideology in the garb of nationalism and by promising development which it claims can be provided only by Narendra Modi. But that said, even so, the weaknesses and vulnerabilities of the BJP's electoral performance in the Gujarat and Karnataka Assembly elections recently, despite the Prime Minister doing everything it takes to heat up the communal cauldron, illustrates a broader point about populist nationalism. And this is my second point, central point. The party may have mastered the art of whipping up bigotry with an eye to winning elections, but it will only be tolerated if people's lives are improving, and clearly they are not improving. Hate-driven nationalism is by no means guaranteed to bring about material benefits, even though many in India expect this to happen. The very fact that the debate on nationalism surfaced when it was becoming clear that the promises of Modi's government had begun to fade indicates that these are ideological illusions designed to prevent a real reckoning with existing or actual reality. The surge in hypernationalism was a way of pushing certain ideas and silencing others in the name of nation and religion. This has taken the form of attacking critics as traitors and anti-nationals, which amounts to a chokehold on speech and the production of knowledge. The ideology of aggrandizing nationalism puts the nation and the interests and its interests above the people. And this is dangerous, demanding sacrifices from the people, including, and we've heard this so much in the last 4 years, and demanding sacrifices from the people, including the forfeiture of their democratic rights in the name of the nation. The real negatives of religious nationalism have to do then with the dangers to democracy, and this is the third point, and the systematic undermining of key institutions and the damage to the social fabric because of attacks on disadvantaged groups. Nationalism built on divisiveness clearly cannot strengthen the country or help improve the economy. But the curious thing, and this is my fourth point, but the curious thing is that opposition parties have failed to challenge BJP's nationalism because they fear that they cannot win the nationalism debate against the BJP, even though its notion of nationalism is narrow and reduced merely to waving flags, shouting slogans, or penalizing people for not uttering the Bharat Mata Ki Jai. In fact, religious nationalism and what I've just said about the limits of the limitedness of the BJP's conception of nationalism is very nicely presented in a short film called Office of Nationalism. And this video has been in circulation the past 2 days, so those of you who haven't seen it would do better than hearing my lecture, would just watch the short film, which actually says everything that needs to be said about the limits of this nationalist project. Now, while the Congress wants to contest the nationalist label which the Sangh Parivar has ascribed to itself to obscure its absence from the national movement, but when it comes to building a counter-narrative, to question the national, anti-national binaries, the party shies away. It is unwilling to resolutely oppose the cynical manipulation of nationalism for fear of losing the Hindu vote. Now, the main challenge significantly to exclusionary nationalism has come from universities. Hence, the ongoing attempt to control critical thought and convert universities into government departments. The concerted attack on the Jawaharlal Nehru University is the most egregious example of the attempt to push its Hindutva agenda among the youth by presenting it to them in the guise of nationalism. Constructing JNU as a space of anti-national thinking was crucial, for it gave this project a famous address and a justification to show its constituency that it can eradicate such anti-national people. The JNU nationalism controversy clearly has proved to be far more important than what we had thought when it all started, because it was really used as a springboard for the reasons that I've just mentioned, as a springboard for the campaign to redefine nationalism, but not just that, also to squash all dissent. Let me then just conclude by addressing the second question that Tanika raised in her remarks, and that is that I still maintain that it is extremely important to emphasize the distinction between the two types of nationalism, that is exclusionary nationalism, which hasn't been a part of Indian history or the freedom struggle, and inclusive nationalism, which emerged from the anti-colonial nationalist movement and has been later constructed through wider struggles for democracy and social transformation. And I think it is this nationalism, the inclusive nationalism, that we somehow took for granted. And it must be said that unlike the Hindu nationalists, I think we just took this for granted and haven't really worked on this. But it is time that we actually did work on it, build on it. But I think it is only possible if we recognize that all diverse communities that make up India, and I think opposition parties in particular have to note this, is that all diverse communities that make up India feel that their respective cultures, languages, religions are respected, and that their secular needs and interests are addressed with impartiality and fairness. This means accepting that there must be different ways of being and feeling Indian. There are as many ways of feeling Indian as there are Indians, so to speak. And this is derived from a composite nationalism constructed not by descent or ethnicity, but by consent willingly given. And that's the loyalty to the nation that we should be working for. Thank you.